This foot-long Subway sandwich has a dark secret behind it. I bought it at a Subway, but that's actually an Auntie Anne's pretzel on the side. Strange, right? Why would a Subway sell Auntie Anne's pretzels? It turns out Subway, Auntie Anne's, Cinnabon, Baskin-Robbins, Dunkin', and dozens of other iconic brands from Cheesecake Factory to Arby's are all owned by the same company. And that company wants all the profit with none of the responsibility. Behind the collapse of America's favorite stores, skyrocketing healthcare costs, and even the housing crisis lies a shadowy financial empire that most people never see. This isn't just business. It's the systematic looting of the American economy happening right under our noses. Welcome to the world of private equity, the most destructive force in American business that nobody's talking about. Meet Stephen Schwartzman, CEO of Blackstone, the world's largest private equity firm. His annual salary is $900 million. His personal net worth, $38 billion. During COVID alone, while millions of Americans lost their jobs, his fortune doubled. The company he runs, Blackstone, calls itself an investment firm, but that's like calling a vampire a blood donation specialist. So what exactly is private equity? Imagine this. You want to buy a successful family restaurant for $10 million, but you don't have that kind of money. Instead, you convince a bank to loan the restaurant $9 million, which you use to buy it. Now the restaurant has to make payments on a $9 million loan it never wanted, while you only put in $1 million of your own money. Then you sell the restaurant's building to your friend for $5 million, pocket that cash, and force the restaurant to pay rent on a building it used to own. You cut staff, reduce food quality, and raise prices. You extract fees for your management expertise, while the restaurant struggles to pay its new debt and rent. Finally, when the restaurant inevitably collapses under all this weight, you've already walked away with millions in profits. That's essentially how private equity works. Let me break it down. First, they find a stable, profitable business, not a failing one. They want something with real value they can extract. Next, they buy this company using almost none of their own money. Instead, they force the company they're buying to take out massive loans, up to 90% of its own purchase price. That's right. The company they're buying takes on debt for its own acquisition. It's like using someone's credit card to buy their car, then making them pay off the loan. The private equity firm typically puts in just 1 to 2% of their own money. The rest is all borrowed, but not by them. The debt goes onto the books of the company they're buying. Once they own the company, they start extracting value any way they can. They fire workers, cut quality, sell off valuable assets like real estate, and load the business with even more debt while paying themselves massive fees and dividends. One favorite trick is called a sale-leaseback deal. They sell all the real estate the company owns, pocket the cash, and then force the company to pay rent on buildings it used to own. Let's look at a real example. Meet Neil Aronson, the secretive founder of Roark Capital. His firm controls familiar brands from Subway to Dunkin' to Baskin-Robbins to Buffalo Wild Wings. Aronson named his company after Howard Roark, the protagonist in Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead, a character who believes selfishness is the highest virtue. That philosophy, taking what you want with no concern for others, is perfectly reflected in how private equity operates. They take none of the risk, but all of the reward. Remember this heartbreaking moment? In 2018, Toys R Us closed all 735 of its stores across America. 33,000 people lost their jobs without severance. News reports blamed competition from Amazon and changing shopping habits. But that's not what really happened. In 2005, Toys R Us was purchased by KKR and Bain Capital, Mitt Romney's old firm, in a leveraged buyout. Before private equity got involved, Toys R Us had about $2 billion in cash and $2 billion in debt, a stable balance. The private equity firms immediately loaded Toys R Us with $5 billion in debt, money the company itself had to repay. Then they did a sale-leaseback deal, selling the land underneath Toys R Us stores and forcing the company to pay rent on property it used to own. A former Toys R Us employee said, "We weren't failing because people stopped buying toys. We were failing because we had to pay $500 million every year just in interest on the debt they forced us to take." By the time Toys R Us filed for bankruptcy in 2017, it had just $300 million in cash and $5 billion in debt. The private equity firms walked away with millions. The workers walked away with nothing. It's the same story with Red Lobster. In 2014, Golden Gate Capital bought the restaurant chain for $2.1 billion. They immediately paid themselves back by selling the land underneath the restaurants to another company and making Red Lobster rent that land back. Within a few months, Golden Gate had recouped their entire investment. Everything after that was pure profit, even if Red Lobster went bankrupt, which it did. Let me tell you about Noranda Aluminum, a profitable smelter in Missouri that employed 2,500 people with good wages and benefits. Apollo Global Management bought it and loaded it with debt. Within 6 months, Apollo had extracted all of their initial investment. They ended up making 3 times their money. Meanwhile, the company struggled to pay the interest on its debt. Apollo even forced the state of Missouri to give them special low electricity rates, which meant other Missouri residents had to pay higher rates to subsidize them. Despite this, the company went bankrupt. Apollo walked away with triple their investment, while 3 pension funds collapsed, the local tax base crumbled, and teachers lost healthcare benefits. Between 2015 and 2019, about 2/3 of retail companies that went bankrupt were owned by private equity. From 2015 to 2018, 7 major grocery retailers were bankrupted by private equity, shuttering thousands of stores nationwide and costing over 100,000 people their jobs. It's not a coincidence. It's the business model. Private equity isn't just killing retail. Like a financial virus, it's spreading into every sector of our economy, from healthcare to housing to education. Let's go to hospital. Any idea who might own it? In the last 10 years, private equity has invested $1 trillion into the healthcare industry. They now own 30% of all for-profit hospitals in the United States and about 2/3 of all air ambulances. The results are as predictable as they are tragic. A 2023 study of 5 million hospitalization records found that in private equity-owned hospitals, you're 25% more likely to get a hospital-acquired infection or injury. When private equity buys nursing homes, they cut staff to boost profits. The use of antipsychotic medication increases by 50% because sedated patients need less care. Mortality rates are 10% higher, and prices also 10% higher. They've even invented creative new ways to squeeze patients. Envision Healthcare, owned by KKR, pioneered surprise medical bills. They would take over emergency departments but keep them outside the insurance networks that covered the rest of the hospital. Patients would go to in-network hospitals, only to get blindsided by massive bills from the ER that weren't covered by their insurance. The practice was so outrageous that Congress stepped in to curb it. Looking to buy a house? Good luck competing with private equity. They currently account for 44% of all flipped single-family homes. In Phoenix and Atlanta, 30% of all homes going on the market are being purchased by private equity. An analysis from MetLife predicts that by 2030, private equity could own 40% of all single-family homes in the United States, converting them to rentals and driving rents ever higher. Got kids heading to college? Private equity has bought hundreds of private colleges, turning them into for-profit diploma mills. Around 35% of for-profit colleges are now owned by private equity firms. Students at these schools end up with lower graduation rates, lower lifetime earnings, higher student loan debt, and higher default rates. Even your tap water isn't safe. In Bayonne, New Jersey, KKR took over the city's water system. The result? Water rates skyrocketed in this working-class town. A 2021 report found that privately owned water systems charge 60% more on average than publicly owned ones, for something you literally can't live without. Behind these statistics are real people whose lives have been upended by private equity. When private equity takes over a large company, 13% of jobs on average are cut. From 2009 to 2019, private equity killed 1.3 million retail jobs alone. Even if you keep your job, your working conditions deteriorate. Employees at private equity-owned companies typically pay more for health insurance, get less retirement contribution, and receive fewer raises. The human cost in healthcare is even more dire. In 1975, the U.S. had about 1.5 million hospital beds for a population of 216 million. Today, with a population of over 330 million, we have just 925,000 beds. Private equity ownership of hospitals has created a health crisis. Nursing shortages have contributed to 1 in every 4 unexpected hospital deaths or injuries. During the COVID pandemic, an estimated 330,000 Americans died because they couldn't afford to see a doctor in time. Meanwhile, private equity executives live in a different world entirely. In 2005, there were just 3 private equity multi-billionaires. By 2020, there were 22 of them, worth a combined $153 billion. While ordinary Americans struggle, these modern aristocrats live a life of unimaginable luxury, all built on extracted wealth rather than created value. Here's where the story takes an even more twisted turn. Ever wonder where private equity gets its money? A significant portion comes from the retirement savings of ordinary Americans. Public pension funds, the savings pools of teachers, firefighters, and other government workers, comprise about a third of all private equity investment. In other words, the retirement money of public servants is being used to fund the very system that's destroying jobs, driving up healthcare costs, and making housing unaffordable for many Americans. Even Warren Buffett, the ultimate Wall Street insider, warns, "We have seen proposals from private equity funds where the returns are not calculated in a manner that I would regard as honest." So if the money isn't going back to the pensioners, where is it going? Private equity firms use a fee structure called 2 and 20. They take 2% of all money invested with them annually, plus 20% of any profits. The fee drain from pension funds is estimated at $30 billion per year for investment performance that is mediocre at best. If you look at New Jersey's State Employees Fund, 14% of the portfolio has been sucked out in fees over just 5 years. Since 2006, a total of $230 billion has been transferred from investors to private equity firms through performance fees. That's money that should be going to teachers and nurses' retirements, instead lining the pockets of PE executives. How does private equity maintain this system despite its devastating impact? 2 words: political power. Private equity operates in secrecy with hidden ties to the companies they control. Many Americans know something is wrong with the economy, but can't identify the invisible hand pulling the strings. These firms spend enormous sums on lobbying and campaign contributions to maintain their privileged position. Neil Aronson of Rourke Capital focused his political donations entirely on Senator Joe Manchin, while Steven Schwartzman of Blackstone fundraises for Donald Trump. But private equity doesn't pick sides. Blackstone donates to both political parties, $5.5 million to Republicans versus $2 million to Democrats in the past year. President Joe Biden received nearly $4 million in donations from private equity executives during his campaign. The revolving door between government and private equity spins constantly. Jay Powell, our Federal Reserve chairman, was a Carlyle Group executive. Many regulatory officials have come from private equity, and many go to private equity when they leave government. Their political clout has given them extraordinary tax privileges. Private equity executives pay just 21% in taxes on their billions through the carried interest loophole, while ordinary Americans pay up to 35%. When Congress tried to close this loophole, Senator Kyrsten Sinema received $1.5 million from private equity and blocked the reform. Routinely lionized in the financial press and lauded for their charitable giving, these modern robber barons buy respectability through donations to museums and universities. They've even been caught colluding with each other in what appear to be fierce bidding wars for companies. Emails obtained in a lawsuit revealed them agreeing to stand down on certain deals and let each other win, ensuring lower prices and higher profits. So what can be done to rein in this invisible empire? The SEC has proposed new rules requiring private equity firms to disclose accurate returns and fees, but the industry is fighting these changes tooth and nail. In Congress, the Stop Wall Street Looting Act would limit the amount of debt used in buyouts, increase transparency, and close tax loopholes. Transparency is key. One simple reform would be requiring private equity firms to identify themselves as the owners of the companies they control. So it would be the Carlyle Nursing Home or the Blackstone Water Company, letting consumers know who they're really dealing with. Without these changes, private equity will continue extracting wealth from the American economy, hurting workers, consumers, and retirees while enriching a small elite class of financial executives. The next time you see a beloved store closing, a hospital cutting staff, or housing prices spiraling out of reach, ask yourself, who really benefits? Private equity claims to make businesses more efficient, but the evidence tells a different story, one of extraction, not creation. One that benefits the few at the expense of the many. Their model takes none of the risk, but all of the reward. When things go right, they get outsized returns. When things go wrong, they're insulated from consequences. Either way, they get insanely rich. It's time we pay attention to the invisible empire reshaping our economy before it's too late. Thank you for watching. If you found this investigation valuable, please subscribe for more reports that examine how corporate interests influence our most personal choices. The truth deserves to be shared. Oh, and we saved the most revelatory bit for last. That Subway sandwich with the Auntie Anne's pretzel, it's only 11 inches long. It's called a foot long, and the pretzel is 11 inches. So,